They were called the families. They lived by a code older than the country itself, and for nearly a century, they ran America from the shadows. Every week, we open the files on the men who built the underworld, the bosses, the wars, the rituals, the betrayals, the blood oaths that bound them, and the secrets they swore to take to the grave. Subscribe. Some stories were never meant to be told.
Picture a dingy storefront in East Harlem, a mere 5 miles north of FBI headquarters, where a portly, cane-wielding man resembling a harmless pensioner was actually dictating the fate of a nationwide criminal empire. This was Anthony "Fat Tony" Salerno, holding court at his impenetrable fortress, the Palma Boys Social Club. In October 1984, Salerno wasn't just barking orders to local street thugs, he was issuing commands to envoys from the Cleveland mob. Demonstrating that the New York Mafia's dictatorial reach extended as far west as Chicago, Salerno ordered the emissaries to warn a rebellious upstart in their ranks that New York bosses made the ultimate decisions. "Tell him it's the commission from New York," Salerno declared. "Tell him he's dealing with the big boys now." Salerno, a 230-pound heavyweight who earned his Fat Tony moniker early on, had spent decades skillfully dodging serious prison time. In his younger years, he used aliases like Tony Palermo or Tony Russo to brush off minor gambling arrests as mere nuisance harassment by police trying to meet their quotas. His influence was so vast that the Manhattan District Attorney's Office even suspected him of secretly financing the 1959 Floyd Patterson-Ingemar Johansson heavyweight title fight. When eventually cornered by federal tax evasion charges, Salerno and his notorious defense lawyer, Roy Cohn, pulled off a masterful courtroom charade. Rolling into federal court in a wheelchair, Salerno played the part of a frail, sickly old man, while Cohn insisted his client was nothing more than an avid sports gambler. The ruse worked beautifully. Instead of a mandatory 2-year sentence, Fat Tony scored a mere 6 months in a minimal-security Manhattan lockup, allowing him to easily communicate with his underlings and run his rackets from behind bars. Upon his release, he lived a luxurious double life, splitting his time between his East Harlem club during the week and his sprawling 100-acre Spruce Bar ranch in upstate New York, where he raised thoroughbred horses and lived like a country squire. In the early 1980s, these godfathers felt utterly untouchable, chatting freely in their social clubs and believing they were entirely immune from law enforcement's electronic spies. But the landscape was shifting beneath their feet. The government was finally waking up to the staggering scale of their plunder, starting with the revitalization of the New York State Organized Crime Task Force under its new director, Ronald Goldstock. Goldstock had inherited a stagnant, apathetic agency where lawyers did crossword puzzles with their feet on their desks, but he quickly geared them up for a real fight against the mob. Then came the explosive revelation that shattered the underworld's sense of security. An FBI agent named Joseph P. Stone, operating under the alias Donnie Brasco, had spent nearly 6 years deep inside the Bonanno family. P. Stone had captured mobsters like Benjamin "Lefty Guns" Ruggiero bragging about the perks of being a wise guy, boasting that they had a license to lie, cheat, steal, and kill without consequences. P. Stone's unprecedented infiltration proved that the Mafia's impenetrable armor could indeed be pierced. If that wasn't enough heat, the press started turning over rocks, exposing the mob's massive financial chokehold on the city. In 1982, the New York Times ran a massive exposé revealing how a mafia cartel known as the Club had a total hammerlock on the city's billion-dollar construction industry, jacking up concrete costs by 70% on massive projects like the Jacob Javits Convention Center, the IBM Building, and Trump Tower. Enter Rudolph Giuliani, the relentless new U.S. Attorney for the Southern District, who made destroying the Mafia his absolute highest priority. Giuliani, driven by a deep personal vendetta to clear the Italian-American name from the stain of organized crime, promised to drop legal missiles on the godfathers. The FBI was more than ready to supply the ammunition. Bureau officials like Thomas Scheer boldly promised to make a hell of a dent in the five families, fueled by a devastating new wave of electronic eavesdropping and wiretaps. The golden age of immunity for the big boys was about to crash down around them in a barrage of federal indictments. Step into the shadowy, high-stakes world of 1980s Long Island, where garbage wasn't just trash, it was a multi-million-dollar gold mine controlled by the most elusive men in the underworld. The Lucchese crime family had an absolute stranglehold on the suburban garbage carting industry, and the New York State Organized Crime Task Force, OCTF, was desperately searching for a chink in their armor. The ultimate target was Antonio "Tony Ducks" Corallo, the untouchable boss of the Lucchese family. Having spent 2 previous stints in prison, Tony Ducks was notoriously paranoid and insulated. He never visited neighborhood social clubs, favored random diners for meetings, and conducted walk-talks in parking lots to ensure his sinister conversations were out of earshot of any law enforcement bugs. The task force's first major break came from an incredibly brave, independent rebel carter named Robert Kubeka. Fed up with the Lucchese-dominated cartel and its rigged bidding system of perpetual property rights over garbage routes, Kubeka volunteered to wear a hidden wire for the authorities. Kubeka's mission was to capture incriminating remarks from carters associated with Salvatore Avellino, the powerful Lucchese capo who supervised the entire Long Island garbage racket for Tony Ducks. While Kubeka never managed to get close to the wary Avellino himself, his undercover recordings of other mobsters issuing subtle threats provided enough legal probable cause to secure a wiretap on Avellino's home phone. However, the home wiretap turned out to be a frustrating dud, capturing nothing but innocent domestic chatter. But it did reveal one vital, game-changing piece of intelligence. Every morning, Avellino would slide behind the wheel of his gleaming $100, 1982 Jaguar, drive 25 miles to Oyster Bay, and act as the personal chauffeur for Tony Ducks Corallo. The OCTF director, Ronald Goldstock, realized that the Jaguar was the Lucchese family's true mobile headquarters, and he became obsessed with planting a bug inside it. Securing a warrant to bug a moving vehicle was a massive legal hurdle, but Goldstock had what he called a message from God. He formulated a novel legal argument based on the relationship of parties, successfully convincing the courts that Avellino wasn't just a driver, but a crucial sounding board and liaison for the Mafia boss. To overcome the jurisdictional nightmare of a car that roamed across 2 Long Island counties and 5 New York City boroughs, Goldstock brilliantly bypassed the need to petition a multitude of judges by securing authorizations from just 2 appellate judges who held sweeping regional jurisdictions. The stage was set for a daring, commando-style raid, spearheaded by investigator Dick Tennion. The golden opportunity arrived on a rainy night, March 23, 1983, when Avellino and his wife attended the annual dinner dance of the private sanitation industry at the Huntington Townhouse. In a stroke of pure luck for the authorities, a protective Avellino handed his keys to the valet and requested that his precious Jaguar be parked far away from the entrance and other vehicles to avoid any accidental scratches. While the tuxedo-clad mobster dined inside, a 10-man surveillance team secured the perimeter, and operatives Jack Breheny, Stroh, and Tennion crept into the isolated Jaguar. In a breathtaking feat of technical espionage that took less than 10 minutes, the team popped the dashboard, planted the microphone, and vanished. "We planned for everything to go wrong and instead everything went in our favor," a jubilant Breheny noted. But the perfect operation nearly unraveled into a complete disaster several weeks later. Avellino took a week-long vacation to Florida, leaving the Jaguar idle in his garage. The secret bug constantly drew power, entirely draining the car's battery. Upon returning, an enraged Avellino called his dealership, and a tow truck was dispatched to haul the dead Jaguar to the shop. The task force panicked. The moment a trained mechanic opened the fuse box, they would spot the FBI's hot wire and the entire covert operation would be blown. In a frantic scramble, the task force's chief of investigators, Fred Rayano, coordinated with the local Suffolk County Police to intercept the tow truck en route. The police pulled the truck over, walked the driver out of sight of the Jaguar, and aggressively interrogated him about his towing permits. During this brilliant distraction, a task force technician stealthily slipped into the Jaguar and ripped the hot wire out of the fuse panel. The clueless dealership mechanics simply blamed a faulty battery, replaced it, and handed the car back to Avellino. The crisis was averted, leaving law enforcement with a crystal-clear, front-row seat to the deepest secrets of the Lucchese crime family. While the state task force was busy eavesdropping on Salvatore Avellino's Jaguar, the FBI's eavesdropping virtuosos were quietly planting a deadly crop of their own. Throughout late 1982 and into 1983, the Bureau's Special Operations Division, led by ex-Marine James Kallstrom, systematically penetrated the impenetrable homes and hangouts of New York's most insulated mafia potentates. Targeting Jerry Langella. Their first target was Jerry Langella, the acting boss of the Colombo family, who treated the Casa Storta restaurant in Bensonhurst as his own secure boardroom. The week before Christmas 1982, at 3 a.m., a team of deft-fingered lockmen bypassed the restaurant's security gate and glass door. When they were confronted by snarling Rottweilers and Dobermans inside, a resourceful agent simply quieted the guard dogs with a blast of foam from a fire extinguisher. They installed microphones in the ceiling panels directly above Langela's favorite table, and the resulting tapes hit pay dirt. Agents overheard Langella conspiring with Ralph Scopo, the president of the Concrete District Workers' Council. This revelation exposed Scopo as the mob's bagman for the multi-million-dollar Concrete Club, prompting the FBI to swiftly bug Scopo's office and car. The ultimate prize, Paul Castellano. But the ultimate prize was Paul Castellano, the boss of the Gambino family, who sat at the very top of the FBI's most wanted list. Castellano portrayed himself as an erudite businessman, but he was a ruthless predator who commanded a squad of hitmen responsible for dozens of murders, forged a lethal alliance with the savage Irish gang known as the Westies, and even had his own abusive son-in-law clipped. By the early 1980s, Castellano had retreated to a sprawling Staten Island mansion dubbed the White House. Protected by an 8-foot brick fence, electronic sensors, video cameras, and Doberman pinschers, it was a bona fide fortress. The Trojan Horse Maneuver. To breach it, the FBI opted for a brilliant Trojan Horse maneuver rather than a high-tech midnight raid. In March 1983, Agent John Kravik sabotaged the television cable lines outside the mansion, allowing Agent Joseph Cantamesa to stroll right through the front door posing as a repairman. Cantamesa charmed the household, fixed the TV and a malfunctioning phone, and covertly installed miniature microphones and hard wires in the baseboards of Castellano's private dining alcove. At first, Castellano's habit of loudly playing the television drowned out the recordings, but FBI technical shamans used exotic antennas to exorcise the interference. The final mission, Fat Tony Salerno. The final, heart-stopping mission targeted Anthony Fat Tony Salerno's impenetrable East Harlem headquarters, the Palma Boys Social Club. Striking at 2 a.m. on a freezing December night in 1983, Kallstrom faced the impossible task of drilling through an exterior wall to disable the alarms without alerting the neighborhood. His ingenious solution was to borrow 2 garbage trucks, dress agents in sanitation uniforms, and have them hurl trash cans and grind garbage at maximum volume to mask the sound of the drilling. Even with the racket, real police cruisers screeched onto the block, forcing Kallstrom to flash his FBI badge and aggressively order the local cops to leave the scene. Once inside, technicians placed mini mics near Fat Tony's conference table. Drilling up from the dark, dank cellar to connect transmission lines, the agents fought off foot-long feral rats, one of which actually bit Agent Kravik on the ankle before the job was done. Despite the bites, the close calls, and the menacing dogs, the operation was a flawless, unparalleled triumph. Within hours, Fat Tony's throaty commands were streaming crystal clear to a listening post 5 blocks away. The FBI's black bag specialists had successfully wired the most guarded sanctuaries in the underworld, setting the stage for a devastating legal onslaught against the godfathers. It was a dynamite concept, one that would strike at the very heart of the criminal underworld. Ronald Goldstock, a Mafia authority and scholar, walked into the office of Rudolph Giuliani, the relentless new U.S. Attorney for the Southern District, with an unprecedented and audacious proposal, a full frontal assault on the Cosa Nostra's supreme governing body, the Commission. The ultimate weapon of choice to obliterate these untouchable crime lords was the RICO law. Stripping off his jacket and rolling up his sleeves, Goldstock enthusiastically sketched out a massive indictment on a flip chart, connecting predicate offenses to tie 4 godfathers and their top lieutenants from the Lucchese, Gambino, Colombo, and Genovese families into one massive, illegal enterprise. G. Robert Blakey, the brilliant legal mind who had originally authored the RICO statute, was welcomed back into the fold as a trusted advisor to the authorities, urging Giuliani to launch the historic strike. Giuliani's mind was running full speed, Blakey recalled, noting that the fiery prosecutor finally had the moxie to unleash RICO's full destructive power. To build the ultimate trap, the feds relied on the most devastating ammunition imaginable, the mobster's own arrogant words. Electronic bugs hidden in the Palma Boys Social Club, Salvatore Avellino's sleek Jaguar, and other mob sanctuaries captured the bosses openly discussing the shadowy commission, their multi-million-dollar extortions, the infamous Concrete Club, and their chokehold on corrupt union leaders. The secret recordings exposed breathtaking, unchecked power. FBI labor rackets expert Jim Kostler deciphered Fat Tony Salerno casually discussing who they were picking to be the next president of the powerful Teamsters Union. The wiretaps also revealed the shifting landscape of the underworld, proving that the strife-torn Bonanno family had been booted from the commission, leaving the 4 remaining New York gangs to rule the national syndicate. The stakes were astronomical, and the pressure was on. The FBI's Pat Marshall, a young agent working exclusively on organized crime, faced the agonizing task of convincing rival agents to surrender their hard-earned tapes and informers to build the ultimate commission case. Then came a golden, heart-stopping opportunity. Investigators learned that a secret commission gathering was about to take place, where bosses like Tony Ducks Corallo planned to veto the induction of a Gambino candidate because the man had once testified in a civil suit. On June 14, the state task force relied on a helicopter and a massive ground posse to track Avellino's Jaguar through dense city traffic, tailing the mobsters to the Bari restaurant and pizzeria equipment company in Lower Manhattan. Fred Rayano, the state investigator, rapidly mobilized units to photograph the bosses as they exited the building, hoping to capture the definitive proof of the commission's existence. But the high-stakes summit shattered in mere minutes. Paul Castellano, Fat Tony Salerno, and Dux Corallo bolted from the building in an absolute panic. Why the sudden exodus? State investigators bitterly suspected that an overly curious FBI agent, Joseph O'Brien, had lurked too close to the restaurant and was spotted by Castellano, blowing the perfect surveillance operation and sparking intense bad blood between the state and federal agencies. Despite the botched stakeout, investigators continued pulling every thread to weave their trap. Agent Pat Marshall played a long shot and ran an old palm print found on the getaway car used in the bloody assassination of Carmen Galante. Bingo, the print belonged to hitman Bruno Indelicato, tying the execution directly to the Gambino underboss and the commission's lethal authority. Even sweeter for the prosecution, the Godfathers were unwittingly hanging themselves by gossiping about former boss Joe Bonanno's explosive tell-all book in his 60 Minutes television interview. Sitting in the bug Jaguar, Tony Ducks Corallo and his underboss mocked Bonanno as a phony and a traitor for violating the sacred code of omerta by confirming Cosa Nostra secrets, ironically providing the exact corroborating evidence the government needed to prove the commission actually existed. Corallo even foreshadowed his own doom on tape, complaining that Bonanno had admitted to running a family and worrying that the government could use those admissions under the RICO Act to lock them all up. Corallo's paranoid premonition was dead on. The trap snapped shut, and on arraignment day, FBI Supervisor Jim Costler sat in a federal courtroom, watching the spectacular parade of Mafia dignitaries being hauled in en masse on RICO charges. This is it, Costler thought to himself, realizing they had finally executed the master plan Blakey had envisioned. Later that day, at a packed, chaotic news conference, a triumphant Rudolph Giuliani stood flanked by justice officials, announcing the takedown of the century and signaling that the golden age of immunity for the big boys was officially over. Step right up to the front lines of the biggest mob takedown in American history, folks. It is the week before Christmas in 1985, and Paul Castellano, the undisputed boss of the Gambino crime family, is looking downright buoyant. He is hanging out in the Madison Avenue office of his powerhouse attorney, James LaRosa, playing Santa Claus by handing out gifts to the clerical staff. Big Paul is currently out on a staggering $2 million bond, facing a massive federal racketeering trial with another one waiting in the wings. The government is accusing him of profiting from a lethal car theft ring run by the sadistic Gambino hitman Roy DeMeo, a crew that stole hundreds of luxury cars, shipped them to Kuwait for a massive profit, and allegedly funneled $20,000 in $100 bills to Castellano every single week. Despite all this heat, Big Paul is completely relaxed, chatting about taking a sunny holiday vacation down in Pompano Beach during the trial's Christmas recess. By Castellano's side is his newly minted underboss and personal chauffeur, Thomas Bellotti. Bellotti isn't exactly the sharpest tool in the shed. He is a notoriously brutal thug who favors handling late-paying loan shark customers by viciously beating them with a baseball bat. But on paper, Bellotti has a pristine cover. He is the vice president of Scar Mix Incorporated, a Staten Island concrete supplier that hauls in over $1 million a year, primarily through city and state contracts, while Castellano's own son Philip serves as president. As the afternoon winds down, Castellano whispers to his lawyer that he is thrilled with his work on the auto theft case, asking for directions to a Fifth Avenue perfume shop to grab a few more last-minute Christmas gifts. But Big Paul is never going to see Christmas. On the evening of December 18, 1985, Bellotti drives Castellano to Manhattan's East Side for a dinner meeting with three powerful capos, Frank DeChico, James Filla, and Thomas Gambino. Around 5:45 p.m., their Lincoln sedan pulls up outside Sparks Steakhouse on East 46th Street, an upscale joint where the former butcher Castellano loved to dine on premium sirloin. Arrogant to the very end, Bellotti slides the Lincoln right into an illegal parking zone, tossing a Patrolmen's Benevolent Association placard onto the dashboard to wave off the meter maids. This is where the Godfather's story ends in a barrage of bullets, but for the federal government, the curtain is just rising on the trial of the century. With the supreme boss of the Gambinos wiped off the board, U.S. Attorney Rudolph Giuliani knows the upcoming commission trial is going to be an absolute bloodbath in the courtroom. Giuliani needs a flawless gladiator to lead the prosecution, so he taps Michael Chertoff, a brilliant 32-year-old assistant U.S. attorney with a golden resume as a Harvard Law graduate and a former Supreme Court clerk. Now, Chertoff has only been prosecuting cases for 3 years, and he has never handled a massive mafia trial or wrestled with a case built so heavily on complex electronic surveillance bugs. But Giuliani sees him as a lightning-quick legal mind who won't flinch when the mafia's high-priced legal artillery starts firing. Realizing that his entire career is on the line and that losing would be a catastrophic embarrassment, Chertoff rolls up his sleeves and starts grinding out 18-hour workdays, 7 days a week, to build an ironclad case. The stakes couldn't be higher. A grand jury can be easily swayed to hand out indictments since they only hear the prosecution side of the story, but the actual courtroom trial is an entirely different beast. Chertoff and his 2 young co-prosecutors, John F. Savarese and J. Gilmore Childers, are going up against a ferocious battery of the sharpest, most artful organized crime defense attorneys money can buy. The mobsters have bottomless pockets and are fully prepared to unleash expert witnesses and every legal trick in the book to rip the government's evidence to shreds. As if the tension isn't thick enough, the defense side gets hit with a mind-boggling wild card. Carmen the Snake Persico, the ruthless boss of the Colombo family, announces that he is going to represent himself in court. The idea of a notoriously violent mafia don standing up to act as his own attorney adds a surreal, theatrical twist to the impending legal warfare. Hovering over this entire explosive setup is the massive, untested shadow of the RICO statute. This trial isn't just about putting a few gangsters behind bars, it is the first colossal courtroom test of the RICO law's true power, designed to completely obliterate the mafia's supreme governing body. If the government wins, it will validate a revolutionary legal weapon. The stage is officially set, the actors are taking their places, and the American mafia is about to face the ultimate fight for its life.